Let me ask you something. What if everything you thought you knew about the Sabbath was a lie? What if tradition wasn't truth? What if the divine message, the one intended to awaken your soul and set your spirit free, had been buried beneath centuries of misunderstanding? For generations, we've been told what to believe, what to practice, and how to observe sacred truths without ever being invited to question, investigate, or listen for the voice of God ourselves. The Sabbath, this one day that appears throughout Scripture as a day of divine rest and sanctification, has become one of the most misunderstood and misrepresented concepts in all of spiritual tradition. What was given as a divine gift has been reshaped, rebranded, and repurposed through centuries of religious tradition, cultural influence, and institutional authority. The truth has been buried, not maliciously in all cases, but methodically, layer by layer, until what we call truth today often bears little resemblance to the original revelation. People are left practicing rituals with no power, honoring days with no understanding, and following systems that were designed more for control than for connection. The danger isn't merely that we're wrong in a theological sense. It's that we're disconnected from something that was designed to energize and align us with the flow of divine order. When tradition replaces truth, what gets lost isn't just accuracy, it's vitality, it's spiritual momentum. It's the inner knowing that you are in harmony with something greater than yourself. We start following routines and calling it righteousness. We obey patterns that are comfortable and familiar, but we lose the very essence of what that day was intended to unlock within us: peace, reflection, renewal, and reconnection with our Creator. The system of the world thrives on busyness, on distraction, on endless striving without rest. But the Sabbath was God's counterposition to all of that noise. It was His declaration that rest isn't laziness, it's divine order. It was His blueprint for human flourishing, not a burdensome rule to measure our obedience. But look at how that truth has been flipped. In many modern churches and faith systems, the Sabbath is either ignored, misunderstood, or reduced to a set of shallow do's and don'ts. For some, it's just Sunday church service. For others, it's Saturday legalism. For most, it's a vague idea they've never been taught to consider seriously. And the deeper reality of the Sabbath as a spiritual principle embedded in the structure of creation itself remains hidden from those who need it most. This is what happens when tradition gets passed down without revelation. We end up defending doctrines we never examined, repeating practices we never understood, and resisting truths that could liberate our lives because they challenge the status quo. The lie isn't just in the misinformation, it's in the assumption that what we've inherited must be correct. That's the most dangerous form of deception, the kind that's coded in reverence and handed to us with sacred language. People say, well, this is what I've always been taught, or this is how my church does it. And they never stop to ask, what does God actually say? What does Scripture actually reveal? Not what man interpreted, not what tradition developed centuries after the fact, but what did the voice of God truly declare from the beginning? Truth, by its nature, liberates. But tradition, when separated from revelation, can enslave. It creates a spiritual numbness that dulls our sensitivity to God's real voice. The moment you stop seeking, you start settling. And when it comes to the Sabbath, many people have settled for counterfeit versions that soothe their conscience but do not awaken their spirit. We need to dig deeper. We need to go past the surface of denominational teaching and into the foundational truths that were established before any religion existed. Because God instituted the Sabbath not as a ceremonial add-on, but as part of the original rhythm of life. Before there were priests, prophets, churches, or synagogues, there was Sabbath. It was the seventh-day rest that completed the cycle of creation itself. It wasn't merely a day, it was a declaration, a spiritual signature written into the structure of time itself. This divine rhythm was meant to realign us weekly with the Creator's heart. It was a gift, not a demand. A sacred pause so we wouldn't forget who we are, whose we are, and why we're here. And yet, that very gift has been tampered with, diluted, and in some cases replaced altogether by systems that do not carry the same spiritual resonance. Once that happens, the power behind the principle fades. We go through motions, but we fail to step into divine alignment. When you begin to see how tradition buried this truth, how it wrapped it in layers of doctrine and dogma, you also begin to feel a righteous discontent. Something in your spirit begins to wake up. You realize that God never intended for truth to be hidden under centuries of ecclesiastical rubble. He intended for it to be lived, breathed, honored, and shared with clarity and conviction. There is a divine intelligence woven into the fabric of everything we see, feel, and experience, from the movement of the planets to the beat of the human heart. Everything operates by rhythm. Nothing in nature is random. Nothing in creation operates in chaos. It's all ordered. It's all precise. It's all vibrating according to a higher frequency that reflects the mind of the Creator. The Sabbath is not merely a religious appointment or a traditional observance. It is a divine rhythm embedded in the cycle of time itself and aligned with the spiritual laws that govern both the seen and unseen realms. It is not optional. It is not cultural. It is foundational. And when human beings step out of that rhythm, the effects show up in their health, their emotions, their clarity, and their purpose. The modern world is obsessed with speed. We've been programmed to hustle, to grind, to move faster, and to do more. The world doesn't celebrate stillness, it labels it laziness. The world doesn't honor rest, it glorifies exhaustion. But the spiritual world operates by a different law. It honors divine timing. It rewards harmony. It calls us to operate not by pressure, but by purpose. The Sabbath was God's built-in system for realigning us with that law. It was His way of reminding us that creation wasn't completed in 6 days. It was completed in 7. That last day, the Sabbath, was not an afterthought. It was the final stroke of perfection. It brought everything into alignment. It wasn't just about God resting. It was about Him establishing a rhythm for all time, a pattern that would continue long after the first week of creation. When you begin to understand that everything divine has rhythm, you stop treating the Sabbath as a rule and start honoring it as a principle. You start recognizing that you are not just a physical being living on a timeline. You are a spiritual being designed to function in harmony with God's calendar, not man's. The Sabbath is not just a day on a schedule. It's a window in time where heaven and earth come into sync. It's a pause in the chaos where clarity floods in. It's a divine interval where burdens fall, noise quiets, and the soul breathes again. This law of divine rhythm governs more than time. It governs destiny. It determines whether we're aligned or off course, connected or drifting, empowered or depleted. The human body needs rest, but the soul needs alignment. That's why sleep alone doesn't restore you. That's why vacations don't always heal burnout, because real restoration comes when your spirit reconnects with the source. That's what the Sabbath was created for. Not just physical rest, but spiritual recalibration. It was designed to break the grip of striving, to reset the inner compass, and to realign the heart with heaven. When you step into that rhythm, you're no longer operating on the world's terms. You're no longer driven by anxiety or fear of missing out. You're grounded, you're centered, you're moving in step with the divine. People who violate divine rhythm often don't realize they're doing it. It doesn't show up as rebellion. It shows up as restlessness. They feel scattered, disconnected, constantly overwhelmed. Their creativity is blocked. Their peace is elusive. Their relationships strained. But what they're actually missing isn't another technique, another motivational quote, or another productivity hack. What they're missing is the alignment that only comes from honoring the rhythm God set in place. The Sabbath is not just a break from the week. It's a return to the source. It's a spiritual re-entry point that recalibrates our frequency to match the divine. Throughout Scripture, God shows us again and again that He moves according to patterns. Whether it's the cycles of the moon, the seasons of the earth, or the appointed times of worship, there is a rhythm that heaven follows. And when we align with it, our lives begin to flow instead of fight. We begin to see opportunities where others see obstacles. We begin to move with peace in the middle of storms. We're not forcing things to happen. We're flowing with the timing that heaven has already orchestrated. That's the power of divine rhythm. It doesn't just change your schedule. It changes your state of being. The lie that's been told is that the Sabbath is outdated, irrelevant, or optional. But spiritual law doesn't expire. What God established at the beginning is still pulsing through creation right now. Just as gravity holds the planets in orbit, the law of divine rhythm holds your purpose in alignment. And ignoring that law doesn't eliminate its consequences. It just delays your awareness of them. The law, when people think of the Sabbath, many imagine a list of rules, a religious obligation, or a rigid tradition observed out of duty rather than desire. But that image couldn't be further from the truth of what God intended. The Sabbath was never meant to be a cold commandment. It was meant to be a living revelation, an invitation into deeper communion, into presence, into wholeness. Religion, in its effort to systematize and control, turned a divine rhythm into a mechanical requirement. But God's heart was never for us to merely obey for the sake of ritual. His heart was for us to experience something transformational, something restorative, something sacred and personal that reconnected us to His voice, His peace, and His purpose. From the very beginning, the Sabbath wasn't introduced as a test of obedience, but as a gift of relationship. When God rested on the seventh day, He wasn't tired. He was setting a pattern. He was showing us that completion includes stillness, that fulfillment requires reflection. This wasn't about checking a box. It was about entering into alignment. God sanctified the Sabbath because it represented a portal in time, a sacred intersection where heaven touches earth and the human spirit is given room to breathe again. But over time, what was meant to restore connection became a ritual divorced from revelation. The focus shifted from relationship to regulation, from spirit to structure, from meaning to method. People began to approach the Sabbath with anxiety instead of anticipation. They feared breaking the rules rather than rejoicing in the rest. They measured themselves by their ability to conform, not their capacity to connect. But God is not impressed with mechanical religion. He's after hearts that beat in sync with His. He wants sons and daughters, not slaves to routine. When Jesus walked the earth, He confronted this very distortion. He declared that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. He didn't say it was abolished. He said it had been misused. He brought the focus back to the heart, back to the principle, back to the intimacy that was always meant to define the Sabbath experience. The tragedy is that most people have never been taught to see the Sabbath as related. They've been told it's legalistic, outdated, or irrelevant. Or they've been conditioned to observe it with cold detachment, never understanding the deeper invitation hidden within it. But when you look through the lens of relationship, everything changes. You begin to see the Sabbath as a date with your Creator, a space where you are fully seen, fully loved, and fully restored. It's not about what you're not allowed to do. It's about what you're being invited into. It's an opportunity to step away from the noise, the demands, the constant striving, and to enter into a rhythm that revives your soul and recenters your spirit. God doesn't need us to keep the Sabbath for His sake. He established it for ours. He knew we would run ourselves dry. He knew we would get lost in the endless demands of life. He knew we would need a consistent rhythm to return us to stillness, clarity, and purpose. The Sabbath is not about earning favor. It's about abiding in it. It's not about proving our righteousness. It's about remembering His. In the silence of the Sabbath, we rediscover the voice of God that gets drowned out by the chaos of everyday life. In the space of stillness, we reconnect with the deeper parts of ourselves, the parts that long for meaning, for truth, for alignment with something eternal. When the Sabbath is embraced as revelation, it becomes a time of healing. Wounds that went unnoticed in the rush of the week begin to surface and find restoration. Questions that seemed overwhelming find answers in the stillness. The soul, once suffocated by performance, begins to breathe in grace again. It's in this sacred space that we remember we are not machines designed to produce. We are souls designed to commune. We are not just workers, we are worshipers. We are not just achievers, we are receivers of divine peace, insight, and empowerment that flows only from time spent in God's presence. The beauty of this revelation is that it sets you free. You're no longer bound by fear, guilt, or the pressure to earn what has already been given. You enter into a rhythm where your spirit is tuned to heaven's frequency. You move through your week not drained but charged, not distracted but focused, not striving but flowing. That's the power of seeing the Sabbath through the lens of relationship. It transforms a burden into a blessing, a rule into a rhythm, a requirement into a reunion. You begin to look forward to that sacred time, not as an escape, but as the epicenter of your strength, your clarity, and your connection with the one who created you for so much more than survival. The beliefs we carry shape the reality we live. From childhood, we are programmed by family, by school, by culture, by the institutions we trust, to accept certain ideas as absolute truth. Rarely are we taught to challenge, question, or investigate the origins of these beliefs. We grow up repeating what we've heard, defending what we've been taught, and organizing our lives around assumptions we never truly examine. When it comes to spiritual matters, this kind of programming becomes even more dangerous because it influences not only our actions, but our identity, our morality, our worldview, and our sense of connection with God. The way people have been taught to view the Sabbath is a perfect example of how powerful and limiting program beliefs can become. Many individuals are convinced that the Sabbath is irrelevant, optional, or a relic of the past. They didn't arrive at that conclusion by studying the Word of God deeply or seeking revelation through prayer. They were programmed to think that way. A pastor said it once, a parent repeated it, a denomination taught it, and it became embedded in the subconscious. From that moment on, the belief is no longer questioned. It's simply accepted. That's how programming works. It bypasses your logic, inserts itself into your subconscious, and begins to govern your decisions and interpretations without your conscious permission. And once a belief becomes internalized at that level, it doesn't just live in your mind, it starts to shape your spiritual posture, your habits, and your resistance to change. People often react with discomfort or even anger when their programmed beliefs are challenged. Not because the new information is wrong, but because it threatens the foundation they've built their identity upon. If someone has spent decades believing that Sunday worship replaced the Sabbath, and then they're shown evidence to the contrary, they don't just face a doctrinal shift, they face an identity crisis. It's not just about a day of the week. It's about everything that day represents. It's about how we relate to truth. It's about whether we value convenience over conviction. It's about whether we're willing to admit that we might have been misled, not out of malice, but out of ignorance, passed down through generations. The programming of belief becomes most evident when people defend practices without understanding their origin. They say things like, "That's what my church teaches," or "That's how I was raised," or "That's what everyone around me believes." Those statements reveal that belief is being shaped more by consensus than by conviction. But truth was never meant to be determined by popularity. The majority can be misled. The crowd can be wrong. History proves it over and over. And when it comes to the Sabbath, the crowd has followed tradition rather than truth. Programming has taken precedence over Scripture, and in doing so it has robbed people of the power, peace, and clarity that comes from aligning with God's original design. Breaking that programming requires courage. It requires the humility to admit that you might have misunderstood something deeply important. It requires the willingness to unlearn in order to relearn. It requires the discipline to go back to the Word, not to confirm what you already believe, but to discover what God actually said. Most people don't do that. They live in echo chambers of confirmation bias, seeking voices that agree with them rather than truth that confronts them. But spiritual growth only happens when comfort is disrupted. When you stop asking, "What have I been told?" and start asking, "What is actually true?" that's when transformation begins. The Sabbath was never meant to be a battleground for doctrinal debate. It was meant to be a doorway into divine rhythm. But belief programming has turned it into a theological landmine, a subject that divides rather than unites. Not because the truth isn't clear, but because the programming is strong. It creates a resistance to even considering the possibility that tradition has replaced revelation. But the moment you step outside that programming, even for a moment, something shifts. You begin to see that the Sabbath is not just about rest, it's about remembrance. It's about alignment. It's about reconnecting with something ancient, sacred, and deeply personal. It's about stepping into a rhythm that was designed to restore your soul and recalibrate your life. When you look at the root of most spiritual confusion or stagnation, it usually traces back to belief systems that were accepted without question. And once a faulty belief is in place, it creates a filter through which everything else is interpreted. That's why some people can read clear scriptural truths and still not see them, because the filter is distorting the meaning. Until that filter is addressed, the truth remains hidden in plain sight. The Sabbath isn't hidden because God made it obscure. It's hidden because programming made people blind. And the only way to break that blindness is to step out of the system that created it. There is a moment in every seeker's life when the noise becomes too loud, when the pace becomes too fast, and when the soul begins to ache for something deeper, something real, something that cannot be satisfied by surface-level spirituality. This is the moment when a person begins to sense that something vital is missing, even if they can't put it into words. The schedule is full, the commitments are plenty, the routines are in place, yet there's a disconnect inside. That disconnect is not a sign of failure, it's a signal. It's the soul's alarm system going off, reminding us that we've drifted from alignment. And that alignment isn't found in more activity or louder worship or increased productivity. It's found in something ancient, something divine, something deeply personal. It's found in the rhythm that God established from the beginning of time, the rhythm of the Sabbath. To awaken to alignment means to become conscious of where you've drifted. It means to stop numbing yourself with busyness and start paying attention to the condition of your inner world. It means realizing that success without stillness is empty, and that motion without meaning eventually leads to burnout. Alignment isn't about performance. It's about positioning. It's about standing in the place where the flow of heaven meets the path of your purpose. The Sabbath isn't just a day off. It's a divine pattern that restores that alignment week after week. It's a spiritual recalibration point that calls us out of chaos and back into communion. When you begin to awaken to this rhythm, you start noticing how far off course the world really is. You see how the systems around you praise exhaustion, glorify hustle, and reward burnout. You start recognizing that most people are living in survival mode, not because they lack faith, but because they've lost alignment. They're constantly pouring out without being poured into. They're racing toward goals that someone else set for them. They're waking up tired, going to bed restless, and living in a loop that doesn't leave space for restoration. And all the while, the divine invitation remains open. Come back into rhythm. Come back to the design. Come back to me. The Sabbath is God's answer to the misalignment of the soul. It's not a punishment. It's not a limitation. It's an act of love. It's a reminder that rest is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's a command not to control, but to protect. It protects your mind from overload, your body from collapse, and your spirit from disconnection. When you honor the Sabbath, you're not just following a rule, you're stepping into a current that carries you. You're positioning yourself to hear more clearly, to feel more deeply, and to live more fully. You begin to move through life with grace instead of grind, with purpose instead of panic, with clarity instead of confusion. Most people wait until a crisis forces them to stop. They wait until their health breaks down, their relationships suffer, or their spirit feels dry before they realize they've been out of alignment for too long. But alignment doesn't have to come through pain. It can come through revelation. It can come through the still, small voice whispering, there's a better way. That's what the Sabbath represents. It's an invitation to choose restoration before collapse, to choose stillness before burnout, to choose alignment before misdirection. It's a proactive posture of trust that says, I don't have to keep going just to prove my worth. I can rest because my worth is already secured. As this awakening takes place, something shifts not just internally, but externally. Your decisions change. Your pace slows. Your discernment sharpens. You no longer say yes to every demand. You no longer sacrifice your peace for approval. You begin to live with intentionality. You protect your time, not out of selfishness, but out of sacredness. You guard the space where your spirit meets God's presence. That space becomes non-negotiable, not out of obligation, but out of revelation. You realize that without that space, everything else loses its meaning. This isn't about withdrawing from life. It's about engaging with it from a place of fullness instead of depletion. It's about showing up with your heart aligned, your mind clear, and your spirit anchored. That's what the Sabbath produces when it's honored from a place of revelation. It's not about the legalism of what you can't do. It's about the liberation of what you can receive. Peace, clarity, joy, restoration. These are the fruits of alignment. And once you taste them, you begin to realize how much you were missing when you were just going through the motions of a noisy life. Living in alignment is not a one-time event. It's a continuous choice. It's a rhythm. It's a weekly return to the center, to the source, to the Creator, who designed you not for endless striving, but for sacred rest. That rest becomes your power. It becomes your clarity. It becomes the place where identity is restored, where calling is reaffirmed, and where your steps become ordered, not by pressure, but by peace. There comes a point when hearing the truth is no longer enough. There comes a moment when the light breaks through the confusion, when the veil of tradition is lifted, and when the soul is confronted with something undeniable. In that moment, truth stops being a theory and starts becoming a challenge. It's no longer about what you know. It's about what you're willing to do with what you now see. When God opens your eyes to a deeper truth, especially one that challenges what you've always believed, you're placed at a crossroads. One path is familiar, comfortable, and widely traveled. The other is narrow, often misunderstood, but alive with divine purpose. Walking in truth isn't easy, but it is necessary if you want to live with spiritual integrity, clarity, and power. Many people experience the moment of revelation and then retreat. They feel the conviction, sense the shift, even recognize the error in what they've previously believed, but the fear of change grips them. They ask, what will people think? What will my church say? What will it cost me if I walk away from tradition and step into this truth? These are not superficial questions. They are real concerns, because truth, especially when it challenges long-held beliefs, will always cost something. It will cost comfort. It will cost approval. It may even cost relationships, positions, or identity structures that have been built around that old belief. But the cost of ignoring truth is far greater. It costs alignment, peace, authenticity, and the deeper walk with God that only obedience can unlock. Walking in truth is not about pride or superiority. It's not about thinking you're more enlightened than others. It's about responding to what God has personally revealed to you. It's about stewarding revelation with humility and courage. Once God shows you something, you are no longer innocent in your ignorance. You are accountable, and with that accountability comes a sacred responsibility to adjust your life your priorities, your rhythm, and your understanding according to the truth he has shown. The Sabbath, once revealed as a divine appointment rather than a religious suggestion, becomes one of those truths that demands a response. It confronts the way you've been living. It challenges the spiritual calendar you've been following. It calls you into alignment with something ancient, sacred, and divine. This is why many resist it. Not because they don't see it, but because they do. Deep down, the truth resonates. The pattern makes sense. The scriptures align. But the weight of change feels heavy. People hesitate not because the truth is unclear, but because it is inconvenient. Yet truth was never designed to make life more convenient. It was designed to make life more aligned. God doesn't reveal truth to increase burden. He reveals it to bring liberation. But liberation always starts with a choice. And that choice begins when a person says, "Now that I see, I can no longer live as if I don't." When you decide to walk in truth, you begin to see how rare that decision really is. You begin to notice how many people prefer comfort over clarity, tradition over transformation. But you also begin to experience the power of a life that is rooted in obedience rather than opinion. There's a stillness, a strength, a confidence that comes from knowing you're in step with the Creator of time. The Sabbath isn't just a day. It becomes a lifestyle of trust. It becomes a weekly declaration that God is your source, your rest, your guide. It becomes the anchor point around which your entire life gains rhythm and focus. That alignment brings peace the world can't replicate. It brings clarity that cuts through confusion. It brings joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. This kind of life doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone chooses truth over tradition, when they stop waiting for collective agreement and start honoring personal revelation, when they stop asking who will walk with them and start walking anyway. Obedience isn't about popularity. It's about alignment. It's about responding to the voice of God even when it contradicts the voice of the crowd. It's about living from conviction rather than consensus. That's where power is found. Not in religious conformity, but in spiritual courage. The courage to walk a different path. The courage to change direction. The courage to reorder your life around what God is truly saying, not just what others have always said. As you walk in truth, resistance may come, criticism may come, isolation may come, but so will depth, so will clarity, so will a kind of peace that cannot be faked or manufactured. You begin to live with a deeper sense of purpose because you know your life is not being led by fear, tradition, or assumption. It's being led by revelation. That revelation becomes your compass, your strength, your guide. It gives meaning to your sacrifices and power to your prayers. It brings your inner world into alignment with divine design. It creates a life that is not just informed by truth, but transformed by it.